Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Unscripted Podcast, the collected wisdom of life living and sorrow. And I am Dr. Ray Mitch, your host and resident commentator about life and sorrow and all things that might be of interest to people out there. My big wish today is for all the moms out there that are listening. Happy Mother's Day. It has been a delightful day in the Rocky Mountain West with rain in the morning and 68-degree weather in the afternoon with sunshine. And that's all for our weather forecast. Yeah, well, you didn't tune in to a podcast to listen to the weather forecast. But anyway, happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there that are listening. And what we're attempting to talk through and talk about is the world of sorrow and how it fits into our everyday living. And that's one of the topics that I have been pressed. It has been pressed upon me within the last few days and weeks. Let me set the context a little bit for you. I teach at Colorado Christian University. We just had graduation on Friday and various festivities and celebrations on Thursday. And it was a day that was filled with bittersweet sorrow. It would probably be the only way to describe it. Many, many, many goodbyes. And I love being a part of the students' lives that I get to be a part of, and really a very small part of their journey, because if you think about it, 3 to 4 years versus a lifetime is a very small part to play. But I do get to be a part of that, and it is very special to me and an honor, certainly, to speak into their lives in as short of a window of time as I'm allowed. And so that added on what I have been talking about in terms of sorrow and how it fits into our world. And we spent a little time talking about expectations and grace, and what does grace have to do with it, in terms of learning about our journey of grief and looking in on our journey of grief, if you will. And so there are a variety of expectations that we bump into, I think, and this is just piled on in a lot of ways to what I've had over the last 2 months or so of the loss of a dear friend, and then on top of it saying goodbye to students, which is a natural goodbye, if you will. Although we're not very good at doing goodbyes. We'll do a see you later or something similar to that to kind of soften the blow. And the reality is that even if you were reading a novel or a book, sooner or later, the chapter comes to a close and a new chapter opens, and that's very much a part, I think, of the backdrop or even the background text of our lives is new chapters closing or chapters closing and new ones opening up again, and they line it up. It's not a matter of that they pile up. And we have this superstitious thinking that, when it rains, it pours kind of superstitious thinking that once you have one loss, you'll just get another, because that's just how the universe works. And the reality is we're not talking about an indifferent universe. We're talking about leading broken lives that are broken by the pain of our broken relationship with God, and that has a direct impact on us, not only spiritually but also physically. And we confront it on a regular basis. We're reminded oftentimes in very profound ways, much like we do when somebody important to us and dear to us dies. So what I wanted to spend some time talking about today and tonight is really the as I have been reflecting on my own journey, is there seems to be a subtle pressure to get over it. Now, nobody is sitting me down, looking me in the eye and saying, how long is this going to take you? Isn't it about time that you get over this by now? And the really strange irony, if you put that in the physical world, we wouldn't even remotely think of saying that to somebody who has a broken leg in the hospital. It's like, how long are you in here? Because I need you, and I need you to be well so that my world can be a little bit safer or better or improved or whatever that is. So there is a subtle pressure, and again, like I said, this is not intentional, but there's a subtle pressure about kind of coming out of it. And I have talked before about my belief that our grief does not proceed in a linear fashion in any way, shape, or form. Actually, I think our grief and our sorrow occurs in a cyclical fashion. And I have, in my recent book, I talked about it in terms of the seasons of our grief. And I think that's indeed certainly what I have been in. And sometimes those seasons take a long time because of the importance and the significance of the person in our lives. Sometimes it doesn't take as long with the kind of losses that I just have experienced by saying goodbye to students that were very dear to me, but to see them flourish and to see them move into the future that God has for them is gratifying. It's exciting. It is wonderful to watch. And so you have this collision of remarkable aspects of this that I think is the winter of our grief. And we go numb, or we feel, we find other ways to distract ourselves during this winter. It just feels like all the color has drained out of the world. And in spite of our best efforts to really kind of distract ourselves and to make it better or to make it look better than it is or anything like that, there's a subtle thing that keeps cropping up that I've been noticing, and that is that and I've heard this from people as well over the years of talking to them as they walk the journey of grief, is that to take care of themselves is being selfish. And that includes with our grief. And so what I want to take a little bit of time talking about and kind of unpacking is what's the difference between selfish and self-care. And the one thing I will add to all of this conversation, or monologue actually, but is the reality is that selfish is a term that oftentimes we use against someone else to get them to do what we want them to do because we've labeled them as selfish. And so it really is a means of shame production in another person in order to get them to change. And so first of all, I want to try to make some distinctions here before we get into it more deeply. But what's the difference between being selfish and just engaging in healthy self-care? And probably the most profound definition I found was in the American dictionary, and it said caring supremely or unduly for oneself regarding one's own comfort, advantage, etc., in complete disregard or even at the expense of those of others. And so selfish is not just I'm doing something to take care of myself and therefore I'm being selfish. And remember, our language really, really matters. And so if we label taking care of ourselves as I'm sorry, I'm being selfish, even in jest, it has a profound impact on our willingness to take responsibility for caring for ourselves, the heart that God has given us, and the heart that has very wounded by the loss of somebody's significance in our lives. And so selfish is caring unduly for oneself at the expense of other people, basically. And it can be comfort, it can be whatever the advantage is, but it is entirely focused on what gain I get out of it, and I don't care if anybody else pays an expense for it, all right? And so selfish is that, and we use that word very, very loosely. I would also add that for the parents out there, be very, very careful at labeling your children's behavior as selfish. We can do more damage than what we're trying to communicate to them, and that is communicate in positive terms instead of communicating in terms that they should avoid. In other words, don't be selfish versus it's good to care for other people. It's good to be committed or sensitive to other people's needs. And that's what we pursue rather than avoid being selfish, because that never works very well, for one. And secondly, it teaches anyone that we're talking to in that regard to be motivated by avoiding something rather than being motivated by pursuing something. And there's a difference between those. There's a huge difference between those two things. And so selfish is caring for oneself and one's comfort at the expense of others. Self-care, on the other hand, is something very different. Self-care is learning to live with the tension between my need for healing and taking care of myself with the needs and demands of others, or the demands of our job, or the demands of other things. But I don't say balance, because it will never be balanced, really. At any given point in time, it will never be balanced. So let's not use that word. And granted, I can get a little picayune about the use of the words we use, but the reality is we frame the world by the words we use. And so if I say, well, I've got to find a way to keep a balance between my need for healing and taking care of myself with the needs of others and demands of others, then it creates a false impression that I can actually achieve it when I can't. I really can't. Now, it's something very different to live with the tension between those two things, because at one point in time, in one slice of time, it may look like I am only taking care of my own heart and my own needs for healing. It may look that way, but that does not mean that it is necessary to the exclusion of the needs of others. And so I can tell you, I have been feeling this over the last month or so, because the demands of my job doesn't stop. It just keeps right on rolling along. It doesn't care, besides the fact that my job is not personified in any way. But the demands do not abate, no matter how bad I might feel. And so I have to find a way to set aside the time to take care of myself, even though it feels as if I'm being, fill in the word, boys and girls, selfish. When I'm not, I'm actually engaging in healthy self-care. So when you carry it over into the world of grief and the world of sorrow, oftentimes we get tempted by those words, and the temptation is I don't want to be selfish, therefore I will care about others more than my own needs. And like I said, at any given point in time, that might be true. If I sit down and talk to somebody in a counseling situation, at that point in time, I care more about their needs than my own. But there is always a balance point for me a balance point, I'll just use that, to take care of my own needs and to be assertive, not aggressive or not demanding, but to be assertive about caring for my own needs so that, what? I can take care of others in an appropriate sort of tension between my needs and others. The problem is that caring for others' needs is a great distraction from all that I feel about the loss of a friend or a spouse or a sibling or a parent or any of those things. It is a great distraction. And oftentimes, I think we soak in the compliments of other people about, gosh, with all that you've got going on in your life, to take time out to do this for me, or whatever the phrase would be, is reinforcement, if nothing else, for the very thing that we need to keep in our rangefinder. Right? If you're familiar with that, if you look through a camera, of course now we don't have cameras anymore unless you're really high-end camera person, but looking at your screen is looking through an aperture that would look at whatever your subject that you're taking a picture of, and that's called the rangefinder in a camera or video camera. So you frame in the subject and et cetera, all that way. So whatever's in my rangefinder is all that I typically pay attention to. And so when I start to distract myself from the immensity of my grief by taking care of other people, then I do a trade. It's like I'll do anything to avoid the immensity of what I'm feeling, and I can just put it away. I can just put it in this little box over here on the side in my heart, and I'll get around to it someday, because after all, other people's needs are so much more important than my own. And that's a typical, quite honestly, that is a typical narrative that we have running in our heads a lot. And we actually berate ourselves for when we actually do healthy self-care. We berate ourselves for doing that and calling ourselves selfish, which virtually guarantees that I will never learn how to do self-care in the world of recovery from grief and loss. We will never learn that. And that is a huge key. I think one of the interesting things about journaling, which I talk a lot about in the world of working through my thoughts and my feelings about the loss of whoever the significant person is, it's different when I put it down on a piece of paper, whether I'm writing longhand or whether I'm typing on a computer. It becomes real, and now I can actually evaluate it. And journaling is a primary means of self-care, because I give voice to my grief. Shakespeare in the play Macbeth actually says that a heart that is silent bids it break because of not speaking the grief that it feels. Now, obviously, he said that a whole lot more eloquently than I just did, but it is very much that. And like I said, what keeps us away from doing healthy self-care is the internal voices that are chirping at us about, you're only being selfish, when in fact I am engaging in self-care. And counseling is that, and support groups that we engage with in some fashion or another. One of the activities I have at the end of teaching this class on grief and loss is I have students reflect on their semester. And it's a final reflection of the semester and what they've learned and everything else. And so many of them make that comment that I never expected to have the opportunity to talk with other students and realize that I'm not alone in what I am experiencing or what I'm thinking or how I'm feeling, and that only becomes possible after they articulate it in a journal and then they speak it to trusted people in their lives. And there's something to that. I think it is not an accident that we were designed for relationship. And that relationship can be with God. It can be with others, certainly. But the other relationship, which we tend to very much overlook, is the relationship we have with ourselves, other than berating ourselves for all the things that we're not doing. That's a relationship too. And if it's built on that, then I will do everything I can to escape the self that I'm berating. And so the world of grief and grieving and loss and sorrow demands my decision about whether or not I am going to take the time it takes to heal, which is a validation of the immensity of the wound that I've experienced. Now, I mentioned this at the first part, in the introduction of my very first book on grief, which is called Grieving the Loss of Someone You Love. And I make mention of that, is that in the early writings about grief and grieving, that one author actually referred to it as a psychological burn wound. And back in those days, they didn't have artificial skin or the kinds of things that we do today that allows people to recover from actual burn wounds. But it is, which we all know, all right? If you think about it, you burn your finger on the stove picking up a pan, or you forget about it or something, and whatever that burned area of your skin is, it, at least initially, it has no feeling at all, and then it wakes up and you're wishing that it never had. And that's really very much like grief. And so we have to find a way to take care of that well, so that it heals well. And when we do that, we have to check to see how well the healing process is going, which is always uncomfortable, because it means we've got to poke and prod and check in and try this and articulate a lot of the feelings and the thoughts that we have running in our head all the time. All of that all falls under the category of self-care. Now, addition to that is not to make it, because I'm adding it at the end, I'm not making it any less significant, is just doing physical things. I mean, keeping active and engaged with people is also self-care, which also meets the needs of other people as well. So if you already have a routine of working out at the gym or meeting somebody else for, a fitness group or whatever, those two are very important, because our bodies react to our grief as much as our minds and hearts do. And they need to be cared for as well. And that is also self-care. Now, the other thing I'll add in here, just as we're kind of rounding the corner and bringing it to a close, is really the fact is that if we look at examples of people that take care of themselves, oftentimes we see that as a very courageous thing for them to do. And certainly in the world of counseling, that is the case, is that the better counselors are the ones that do the very things that they recommend their clients to do in terms of taking care of themselves. They do that, and that's taking care of their most critical instrument in terms of taking care of other people, is taking care of their hearts and themselves. And a really good example from Scripture even is that Jesus himself, God incarnate, but now human, and he is human, and he sleeps, he eats, he spends time away by himself, and to review and to pray and to spend time with his Father, the most important person in his life. All of those things are very much a part of the landscape of what we need to do as well. And that means connecting with safe people in our worlds. And what that and be clear about that, okay? Because not everybody is safe. And I will say, just because somebody's a Christian doesn't make them safe either. But not everyone is safe. And just because they can keep a confidence doesn't make them safe necessarily. The people that are safe are not the ones that make you comfortable. The people that are safe are the ones that are willing to walk with you on this journey and are committed to your discovery of your own needs during this time, rather than telling you how you should believe, how you should think, how you should behave, all of the other things that come along with people that generally are not very safe. Because safe people encourage us to grow and encourage us to own ourselves even more fully, with the goal in mind down the road, not now, but down the road, in terms of being able to help others and to be available for others. But we cannot short circuit the process that we are under right now. We would really love to. I would really love to jump from being at, let's say, on the alphabet from A to Z, and I'm in D. I want to jump from all the way to Z and get to the end and get on with helping other people. But there's a matter that I think grief plays a role in our lives in training us in empathy and compassion. And that's a big, big part of our ability to walk with other people, is not built on all the techniques and all the empathy training I've had, but on to what degree am I able to be empathic with my own heart, with myself? How able and compassionate am I with myself? Or do I just get more ruthless and demanding and say, essentially say, although we don't ever articulate, and that's what makes this such a shadowy thing, is that, pull yourself out by your bootstraps, cry me a river, build a bridge, and get over it. And get on with life, because after all, that's all there is anyway. And I guess, if that's how we're going to define life, and the biggest challenge, I think, ultimately with grief is the sense of all of our investment of love into the relationship with the person that we've lost, and wondering, is this all there is? And the thing is that we tend to be, even in our grief, we tend to be very myopic. We tend to be very particular about just the area of my life that I'm in right then. And I can't really think about the future just yet. And that's fine. That actually is just good. I have had so many people that say, if this is the way it is and this is the way it will be for who knows how long, I don't want it. And both statements, the if statements they've made, are, that's true. If that is all it is, I wouldn't want it either. But the problem is our tendency in terms of walking with other people and even encouraging this self-care stuff that I'm talking about is that we depend way too much on words and way too little on our willingness to be a companion for them. Another way to put it is that people don't need your profundity, they need your presence. And that's particularly true when people are walking through the valley of the shadow of death. They need a companion. They don't need a drill sergeant, somebody to tell them how to get it done and get it done quickly. That is not helpful to anyone, really. And we think it is. And again, we get so dependent on telling them things that we forget about the power of our presence in their lives, where we're not necessarily saying anything of any significance. We're just saying, yeah, this is really awful and this is really tough, and I'm willing to walk with you through it, whatever it looks like for you, and when can we get together next? Or I will be available, or I will check in on you and see how you're doing. And if you say, I don't know, or I'm fine, I will take you at your word, but I will also follow up with, let's define that a little bit more. What exactly is going on in your world? And if you say you're numb, a lot of times safe people will say to you, yeah, I get that. I really do get that. And that's the place you're at. That's the season you're in, is a season of numbness, and things are kind of stuck and not feeling really much of anything at all, and not feeling much motivation to do anything or get anything going. And if there are things to be done, we kind of divorce and dissociate it from our feelings for the time being to get it done, and then we move on and come back to the baseline of sadness, which I think I've mentioned in other podcasts, is that I that's my right now at this point in my life, with the losses and the significant loss I had in March, but the other kind of miniature losses that I have in saying goodbye, the baseline is sadness. I can rally to accomplish anything, and I did during the last month of the semester. I would rally to do my classes and engage with students and to joke around, and for all intents and purposes, you would not be able to tell the immensity of grief that I was feeling at the time. And it's not because I was trying to hide. It was more a matter of, I've got a job to do. I need to be responsible to do it as well as I can, which is the key phrase here. And then we come back to the baseline, and that's the journey of grief. That is the journey going through this very first season of our grief that is dark and stuck and numb, and I still a little disbelieving that we're here, and all of those things, and that they're all a natural part of that. And so we'll hang on to tokens and things like that of the person, and we'll start crossing anniversaries and events and things that we shared with them, and we'll be reminded again just at how deeply we feel that. And quite honestly, and hear me when I say this, that's okay. I'm not saying it's okay to feel awful. What I am saying is it's okay to be human. And that is the most human thing that we have, that we do, and that is our experiences of grief and grieving, because it is part of how we were designed. And we might say, well, that's kind of the dark part of it then, and maybe that's so, but the cost of grief is love, and the soul of love is vulnerability, and those things are entirely well invested, even though it feels, when it finally comes to a close, it feels like it wasn't. And that's to be expected. That is just to be expected. It is not something to pile on and say that, this was not worth it. And we will have a variety of vicissitudes coming on this journey as we traverse it. And like I said at the beginning of doing this podcast, that I'm just going to be using myself as an example, just to not only validate and companion with other people that are walking this journey, but also to highlight some of the features of the seasons of our grief that I am feeling in a particular way. And I know coming into these weeks, kind of post-semester and post-grading for me, it will come roaring back. I will be reminded. It already has in a lot of ways. So I think that's it for tonight. Thanks so much for joining me for this brief time to talk about it. Our digital home of materials and things on grief and grieving, and other materials for just life and living can be found at sgi-net.org. You can send me questions there on Instagram at SGI_international. on Instagram. At Facebook, we have a new Facebook page, and that is Stained Glass International, all lowercase, all one word. And you can find slowly but surely items being built up on that page, Facebook page instead of my own personal one. And then also at LinkedIn, I'm still going to be using my personal one. I will be changing that over to a Stained Glass International one as well, or SGI. So if you want to follow us or follow me on this podcast, you can do that at SGI International or at Facebook, Stained Glass International, or on LinkedIn at Dr. Mitch. You can always find out more about us on the sgi-net.org website. Everything is there that you could ever want, and more is coming this summer as time goes on. If you want to partner with us, thank you so much for growing not only our scholarship fund to make it possible for students and other interested people to engage in a silent retreat and experience God in a very, very different way. All of the donations and gifts are tax deductible for SGI. You can find a donate button on the website, or if you want to send us a check, you're welcome to do that as well. You can just make it out to SGI and send it to P.O. Box 322, East Lake, Colorado 80614. And I think that is it for tonight. I appreciate your time and patience in listening through. Hopefully we have hit on some topics that are interesting to you. There will be others to come. I promise. I will be reflecting on my own experience. Not that I assume everybody has the same as me, but I don't think I'm that different either. So I think that's it. Until next week, love ya. Later. Bye.